Hey guys, and welcome back. Today, we're going to walk through the process of restoring a database that is being protected by the transparent data encryption feature from an Azure SQL Managed Instance to a SQL Server 2022 instance. So let's get right to it. All right, guys, so we are logged into the Azure portal now. And the first thing that I'd like to do here is just to kind of walk you through my environment here so that you can see what type of resources we'll be working with here today. So first, we have a Azure SQL Managed Instance, and on this actual instance, we have one database named AdventureWorks. Today, I'll be restoring that AdventureWorks database onto my SQL Server 2022 VM machine right here. Now, my AdventureWorks database is protected by the transparent data encryption feature, and for that feature, we are using a customer managed key. That particular key is being stored inside of my key vault resource right here. Now, for those of you that would like to see more about how to actually configure customer managed keys, please go watch my video that I recently uploaded that walks you through this process. For our demo today, we will not be talking about the customer managed key process. And then to continue with my resource list here, we have a storage account, and I'll be utilizing this to upload our backups to. And then lastly, we have a Azure Bastion host, which I'll utilize that to connect to my VM instance here. All right, so let's kind of get things going. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to connect to my managed instance resource here. And I want to come down here to the identity section, and I just want to make sure that I have the system managed identity here turned on. And it looks like it's on, so we are all good here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to be able to take a new backup on my managed instance and write that backup out to my storage account. So to do that, I need to make sure that my managed instance has the permissions to do that actual write. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my storage account resource, and then I am going to go to the access control blade, and I'm going to add a role assignment for my managed identity for the Azure SQL Managed Instance. So the permission that I want to grant here is going to be called storage blob data contributor, and I'll just expand this out real quick so you can see exactly what we're adding here. So I will click this one, I will go to the next tab, and then I actually want to grant this to a managed identity. So I'm going to choose my managed identity here, my SQL Managed Instance, and then this is my instance here. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to review and assign. All right, so that is assigned now. So now, the only other thing that I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to connect to my managed instance, and I'm going to need to create a credential that will reference my storage account container. So let me jump back into the Management Studio tool really quick. All right, so we're back inside of Management Studio, and as you can see, we have our one database right here for AdventureWorks. But the first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to create a credential really quick for my managed identity here. All right, so my managed identity has been created now. So now I want to go ahead and take a backup of my AdventureWorks database and write it out to my storage account. So I'm just going to get rid of that T-SQL statement here and add in a new T-SQL statement here to take my backup here. One thing to note is that the only way that you can take a backup here is you have to specify the copy only option here. So just make sure that you kind of specify that. And then one more thing that I'm going to do just so I can monitor this, I'm going to say stats equal to 5. And we'll look over here at the messages tab, and we can see that my backup has now been completed. So everything is good here. So the next thing that I want to do now is I want to log into my SQL Server 2022 instance, and then I'm going to try to restore this backup that we just took, and we'll see what kind of happens there. So let me jump back over to the Azure portal really quick. All right, so back inside of the Azure portal here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my resource group, and now I want to actually connect to my SQL Server 2022 VM machines. I'm just going to hit the connect button right here, and I'm going to connect to it via my Bastion host. And I will pass in my username and password here. And then I will hit the connect button. Then it's going to pull up my VM machine here in another window. All right, so it's pulled up here. So now I'm going to launch the SSMS tool. Then it's going to ask me to connect to my SQL Server here. I will just choose Windows Authentication and go ahead and connect to it. And I'm going to open up a new query window here. And then I'm going to see if we can restore my database backup. For the purposes of our demo here, I'm just going to see if we can just do a restore for the file list only here. Now, my expectation is that this is not going to work. So once this error is out here, we'll kind of look at the error message so that we can kind of understand what is going on here. So I'll just run this really quick. And as you can see, we got an error message here that says it cannot find the server asymmetric key with the thumbprint and in this long GUID right here. So basically what is taking place here is that since we have the transparent data encryption feature turned on our Azure SQL Managed Instance, the backup files are also encrypted. So what this error message says is that this particular VM machine right here, the SQL Server instance here, does not have access to the decryption keys to actually read this particular backup. So one thing to note is that Azure SQL Managed Instance by default enables the transparent data encryption feature using a service managed key. And that particular key is managed by Microsoft. And because of that, we can't get access to that actual key. So if your databases on Azure SQL Managed Instance are using the TDE feature via the service managed key, you cannot restore those backups anywhere outside of Azure. Now, for our particular environment here, I still have the TDE feature turned on, but I am using a customer managed key. So what that means is that I own the actual TDE protector key and it's stored inside of my key vault. So because I own and manage that actual key, I can actually use that key on my SQL Server 2022 instance here so that we can restore that particular backup. So once again, if you would like to see how the customer managed key feature works, go check out my video right here where we walk through the whole process end to end. I will also post a link to it in the description below. So all right, now we have a couple of things that we need to do so that we can ensure that our instance here can access our encryption and decryption keys so that we can actually restore this backup here. So I mentioned that my TDE key is inside of a key vault. So we're going to need to ensure that our instance here can actually connect to our key vault so that we can read that key. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is create a service principal that can be used by my instance here to connect to my VM machine. So what I'm going to do is let's come back here to the Azure portal real quick. And I want to go into Azure Active Directory. And then once I'm inside of Active Directory here, I want to do a brand new app registration. So once this page loads up, I'll click on new registration here. And then I'm just going to call this My Key Vault app. And then I only need this to work with one particular tenant, so we'll leave that as is. And then I will register my app here. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is come down here to the certs and secrets feature. And then I want to create a new client secret here. So I will just give this a description. Let's call it My Key Vault Secret. And I'll just leave this set to expire in 6 months. That's fine there. All right, so I have my new secret here. So one thing that I want to do is I'm going to copy out my value for my actual secret so that I can reference this later on if I need it. So let me just paste this over here so I can reference it later. And then the other thing that I want to do, I'm going to come back up here to the overview section, and then I also want to copy my application ID as well, as I'm going to need that a little later on as well. So I will copy that. All right, so now that we have our app registration in place here, this app registration is going to be used by the SQL Server 2022 instance in order to connect to our Azure Key Vault. So what I want to do now is I want to ensure that this particular app registration here has access to my Key Vault. So I'm going to go into my Key Vault here. And then I want to create a brand new access policy here. So I will just click on the Create button. And I want to give my policy the get permission, the list permission, and then the unwrap key permission and the wrap key permission. Then I'll click on the next button here so that I can choose my actual principal here. And my principal is going to be that my Key Vault app that we just created. I will use that, nothing to do here in the application section. Then I'm going to click on Review and Create. All right, so now that that is completed, the next thing that I need to do is I need to jump back into my SQL Server 2022 VM here. And I'm just going to minimize the SSMS tool here really quick. And I'm going to open up a new browser window because what I'm going to need to do as part of this next step is I'm going to need to install the SQL Server connector for Azure Key Vault. This installation is going to install a DLL assembly on our VM machine here that is going to allow my SQL Server instance to communicate with the Azure Key Vault and to use that particular Key Vault as a key management provider. So I'm going to go out to this link here and I will paste the link for this in the description as well. Just click on no thanks for all of this. And then I'm going to download the SQL Server connector tool for Azure Key Vault. And then once that is downloaded, I am simply going to run through the installation real quick. All right, so I'll just click on the next button. I will accept the terms for this. I will click on next again. Then I will click on next once more, and then we will begin the installation. All right, so everything ran just fine with the installation. So we can close out of this now. And I no longer need this window anymore, so I will close this as well. All right, so now that we're back in here, so we just got through installing the connector for the Azure Key Vault. So the next thing that I'm going to need to do now is I'm going to have to run the sp-configure command here so that I can turn on an option to use a key management provider. I'll just open up a new window here and I am just going to run this statement here so that we can turn on our advanced options here with a reconfigure, and that works just fine. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to enable the EKM provider feature here and then run a reconfigure as well. All right, so that is good. So I'm going to get rid of these here. And now the next thing that we're going to need to do as part of this process here is we're going to need to create what is called a cryptographic provider. This particular provider is going to reference the DLL assembly file that was installed as part of the connector for Azure Key Vault. So basically all this is doing is letting our instance know about that particular connector option so that we can begin to utilize that. So I'm going to drop in this T-SQL statement here to create a cryptographic provider, and we're going to name it Azure Key Vault _EKM. And then we're just going to reference that DLL file that was actually installed on our machine. All right, so our cryptographic provider has been created now. So I'll just open up another new tab here. And now the next step that we're going to need to complete here is that we're going to need to create a SQL Server credential that can use this new cryptographic provider, and then we're going to need to assign that actual credential to a login on the SQL Server instance that has administrator permissions. So I'm going to take this quick script here that I grabbed from the Microsoft documentation. And as we can see, we are creating a new credential here, and I'm just going to call my Key Vault credential here, and it's going to reference the identity here, which is the name of my Azure Key Vault. And then we're going to need to pass in the secret field here. So the secret field here is going to be a combination of the client ID and the secret value. So these values are the ones that are going to come from the app registration that we created. So remember that app registration was meant to give us a service principal that our instance here can actually utilize to connect to that Key Vault. So I'm going to go back and grab those values that I copied earlier. So the client ID that I copied was this value here. And one of the things to note is that we need to remove all of the dashes that are a part of the client ID. And then at the end of this, I'm going to append my secret value. I will just come right here and append my secret value. And then I'm going to run this statement here so that I can create my new credential here. All right, so everything looks good here. So the next thing that I need to do now is I need to assign this credential here to a login with admin permissions. So I will use this script here, and I'm just going to reference my Windows login here, as I know my Windows login has admin credentials. So I will just reference that here, and then I will add the credential to my login. Now there is one more step that we need to do here, and we need to create a asymmetric key. So basically we are creating a key on our SQL Server instance that is then going to reference that TDE Protected key inside of my Key Vault. And then we're going to need to actually open this key so that we can utilize it here. So this T-SQL statement here, create asymmetric key, my SQL Server AS key from provider, which was my Azure Key Vault EKM key, and then with the provider key name. So this is the actual name of my TDE Protector key that is stored inside of my Azure Key Vault. So basically I'm just letting my instance here know what particular key inside of my Key Vault I need to use to work with our database. And then we're going to open up this actual key. So I will run this statement. All right, so now my asymmetric key has been created now. So now the next thing that I want to do is I need to create a new login from this asymmetric key that we just created here. So I'm going to create a new login called TDE_login from my asymmetric key here. And that ran just fine. And now the last step that I'm going to need to do is I want to remove the credential that I had assigned to my Windows login. And then I want to add that credential back to this new TDE login here. So I will just run this statement here to drop my credential from my Windows login. And then I will add that credential back to this new TDE login. Oops, looks like a copy paste error. We'll just remove that. Now with these steps completed now, I should be able to restore my backup file from my storage account. And my SQL Server instance now will be able to connect to Azure Key Vault to read my TDE Protector key to decrypt that actual backup. So I'm just going to open up a new query window once again, and I will run a restore command for the file list only here. And as we can see now, I am able to read my backup file now. So since I can actually read my backup file, I will just go ahead and run an actual restore of that database here. One key thing to note is that you will have to utilize the move option here so that you can move your data files, your log files, and the XTP file to its proper location on the SQL Server instance here. So I will just run this statement, and it looks like my backup is running now. So I come back over here and I will refresh my databases. And just like that, we can see that my AdventureWorks database has now been restored. My table objects are all here, so I can easily right click on one of these, select top 1000, and here's our data. All right, guys, so you just saw a long and lengthy process that is involved for restoring databases from Azure SQL Managed Instance to SQL Server 2022. Now, the steps that we went through today are only necessary if your databases are being protected by the transparent data encryption feature, as that feature will also encrypt your database backup files as well. Also, remember that you must be using a customer managed key for the TDE. If you are utilizing the service managed key for TDE, you cannot restore your database. All right, guys, well, this concludes our demo for today. So let me know in the comment section what you think about this process, or if you have any questions, then let me know. Until next time, guys, peace.